Welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. Today's webinar is going to be focused on how to engineer significant revenue growth for 2021. Many of us would love to turn the page on 2020, as we have, and so we look forward in earnest with 2021 and how we're going to actually really grow revenue and do it in a dramatic, predictable, efficient way. That's what we're going to discuss today. The one word I would talk about in our webinar today is how to engineer, and the word really there is engineer significant revenue growth. I think that's key. We chose that because we are all looking for a method to engineer revenue growth for our companies. We want to do something so that it's predictable. We want to do it so it's consistent, capital efficient. We also want to do it so that it's not dependent upon personalities. It's dependent upon a system, a winning system that you put in place to help you grow and establish success for your company. One of the reasons I'm passionate about this and excited to share this information with everybody today is because I believe that this is one of the major skills. If you're going to run a business, one of the major skills that you need to have, not only now for where you are today, but also through your entire career. So if you are at one company, or if you're at 5 more companies in the future, you can bring this model, this proven model, to practice and really figure out how you're going to apply it. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. Okay. I looked at many of the people that are attending today, and we have quite a diverse list of attendees and registrations for today's webinar. And I wanted to talk a little bit about each person that's attending today brings a different perspective and a different set of needs. So for instance, if you're a CEO or business owner, you may be in a situation where you're saying, I want to have revenue growth for 2021 that's predictable and scales. And so that might be upmost on your mind. If you're an entrepreneur or you're early stage company, you may be saying that you want to have a revenue growth plan and model that's going to be capital efficient. You don't want to waste resources, you don't want to waste money, and you want to do it in a very predictable way in terms of how you set the stages, each stage of growth for the company. A number of you that are attending today represent serial, what I call business builders, or incubators, or investors. And in that case, you may be looking for a proven model that allows you to apply this to your portfolio of companies in a predictable way and get predictable results. I know when this model was created a number of years ago, and we'll talk about where we created this model, and we showed that to a number of venture partners in venture firm partners in Silicon Valley. They all looked at each other and said, this is what we want to apply to all of our portfolio companies, because finally, it gives us the predictability, the assurance, and the certainty that we can achieve our revenue growth goals. What I found with many entrepreneurs and business owners is that they're very good at creating applications, solutions, services, and bringing those to market. So what they do then, once you have that great solution, is you look around and say, okay, now how do I grow the revenue for this solution and do it in a very predictable, demonstrable way? And what I found is that there's not really a playbook out there. So we want to share with you today a revenue acceleration playbook and how do you apply that to your business. As with all of our webinars, I would encourage you to ask questions, post your questions, if you will, throughout the webinar, and we will make sure that we address those questions either during the webinar, or by all means, we'll make sure we get those questions get addressed at the end of the webinar. If for some reason we have too many questions, which we do from time to time, and they're great questions, then I'll make sure that I follow up with each of you individually to get that addressed. So as we look at this year, at 2021, how exciting it is for all of you, you think about where are you today and where do you want to get to? And how do you make up this gap, this delta? Some of you may be saying, we want to grow revenue by 30% year over year. Some may say we want to double revenue year over year. So all those really have, if you will, a cause and effect. The one thing I'd say about revenue growth that I've really learned over my career is that revenue growth is a process. It's not a quick fix. It's not a silver bullet. It's an important process for all companies to master and for teams to align. So for today, your facilitators are going to be myself, Robert Chakowski, and Craig Remy. We're the founders of On Demand Advisors. And we founded this firm 12 years ago as a global revenue acceleration agency. For myself, I've been a serial CEO for private and public companies. I really help build companies at various stages, early stage companies, mid-stage, and public companies. For Craig, he's been a serial CMO, Chief Marketing Officer at these companies. We've had wonderful opportunities to operate companies and work together. And of course, he's done a tremendous amount of branding and positioning and working with companies to differentiate themselves, working with companies like Google, Levi Strauss, Disney, and so forth. So we bring a great set of skills to the table, but we've also built out a team to help our clients execute the plan, because once you build a plan, you need to go ahead and execute that. When Craig and I were at a company called Intact, and many of you may know Intact. Intact is a software as a service financial applications company out of Silicon Valley. We had an opportunity to really scale and grow the company. We partnered with Salesforce, went to market together with them, and half of our revenue growth, adding 5,000 new customers, came through selling direct. And so we really focused on doing that extraordinarily well. The other half came through selling with partners and having partners sell our solutions and take it to market. So we're going to talk about that on this webinar. We're also going to spend a whole webinar next 2 weeks from now just talking about a proactive partner program and how do you do that. So as always, I'd like to ask a couple poll questions and share the results with everybody. So if you would be kind enough to participate in our poll, we'd appreciate that. So just looking at this year, what are your revenue growth targets that you have for this year? Is it to keep the same revenue that you had from 2020? Is it to grow by 25%, 50%, or more? So go ahead, and if you could apply your thoughts, and we'll share that with everybody here today. I love to make this as interactive as possible and get everybody's participation. Okay, so we'll keep this open for just a little bit longer. And thank you everybody for participating. Appreciate your input. Okay, let me go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Well, fortunately, none of you want to keep revenue the same as last year. That's a great thing. 27% stated you'd like to grow at like 25%. 36% between 26 and 50%. 5% by 51% or more. And I love this. 32% of you stated that you'd like to double revenue year over year. So that's fantastic. And I think these are all worthwhile goals. So we want to talk about how you're going to engineer your growth this year to achieve these targets. Now we got one more question I'd like to ask or poll you on next, and that is if you think about these goals, what's your biggest challenge? So heading into this year, 2021, what would you say is your biggest challenge that you have to going ahead and growing the revenue? And I'm going to launch this poll. So you may think that one of your biggest challenges is to better understand your buyer and what are their priorities. You may be saying, I've got this goal, but I don't have the marketing resources to go and execute the goal. You may be saying that really your biggest challenge is getting quality sales opportunities that you can close. You may say that, hey, it's the front end. We need some demand creation. We need to have a consistent demand creation every month. Or you may be looking at it and say, we've got enough demand. We just need better performance from our sales organization. Okay, so this is good. So I'll keep this open here for just a little bit longer. Go ahead and place your input, if you would, where you think it's most appropriate. And let me go ahead and I'm going to share this information back to everybody on today's webinar. Okay. 7% of you stated you'd like to better understand your buyer and their priorities. 15% of you stated that you don't have the resources in marketing, so that becomes an impediment. 41%, this is the number one choice, stated you need more quality sales opportunities that you can close. And we're going to talk about quantity and quality today too, because they're both important. 22% stated that you need consistent demand creation every month, and 15% stated you'd like to have better performance from your sales organization. So that's our results for these two polls. Thank you very much. We'll have another one coming up at the end of our webinar today too. Okay. Here's our agenda. Today what we want to do is talk about how do you create your 2021 revenue acceleration playbook. That's what I call it. It's a playbook so that you can execute the plays and achieve the results, achieve the victory that you have for this year. And we're going to talk about a couple of different ways to do that, either through new customer acquisition, current customer upsell, cross-sell, working with partners, or initiating new services or solutions that you have, or you may be pursuing new markets. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what is the set of revenue acceleration best practices and how do you apply those to your business, and then deploying that engine, as we call it. Finally, we'll talk about some of the revenue acceleration innovations that we've created at On Demand Advisors and share some of those with you, as we've done in these last 3 webinars leading up to today. So for 2021, if you look at some of the major criteria that is important, one is intentionality. One thing that I realized as we work with many different companies, many different size companies, many different individuals, is that more than anything else, you want to be intentional about where the revenue comes from, because you want to define what you're going to get so that you can actually engineer your path to that point. Number 2, it's predictable. So you can gain visibility into future quarters. One of the big challenges I found as a CEO at a public company is that the second question you're always going to get in a board call is, what does next quarter look like? So it's not only about achieving success this quarter, it's about having visibility into future quarters. The third thing is consistency. So I always listen to some of the earnings calls, and it's always interesting when you hear occasionally that companies stumble and miss their numbers. And it's largely because they didn't create consistent demand, consistent execution that they needed to have from quarter to quarter. The next area is capital efficiency. If you have more money than anybody else, then you could try out lots of different things and experiment. But if you're like most of us, you're looking for proven ways that you can apply your investments and have the right type of payoff or ROI you're looking for. And finally, I think it should be integrative. When I look at working with many teams, it's sales, it's marketing, it's business development, it's other facets of the company that all need to align together for those common goals. So let's talk about creating a revenue growth plan for each area. And I just used a number of $8 million and said, hey, for 2021, we'd like to have incremental $8 million added from over last year. And how do we do that? So one of the things that if you joined us in past webinars, you'll notice that we talk about funnels versus pipelines. And there's really one funnel that most companies have. And you may say there's top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel. We typically break it into 3 funnels. Top of funnel is marketing. So this is your marketing. This is your lead generation efforts. Middle of funnel is what we call lead conversion. So how do you convert somebody that's interested in your services or solutions into a sales-ready, qualified sales opportunity? And finally, your sales funnel. So let's look at one area, which is new customer acquisition. We're all interested in acquiring new customers. And you could build these funnels out as we're thinking about 2021 today. So you could sit down and say, this is what I want to achieve. So if I wanted to achieve $4 million in net new revenue just through new customer acquisition, and my average contract value or ACV is 100,000, automatically I know that I need to close 40 new transactions this year. Now, most of us understand what the conversion rate is for our CRM funnel. So you're closing of sales opportunities, maybe 1 out of 4, as we're showing here, or 25%. That really means that you need 160 sales qualified leads or sales opportunities to close. The key, though, that I find is how do you create these two funnels here in front? If you do this, you essentially build the flywheel for your company. So as we talked about, this first one is marketing. And through the right set of marketing campaigns, programs, and content, we're going to create 133 market qualified leads per month in this exercise. We're going to also find how do we actually convert those 133 market qualified leads into 13 or 10% per month, which, by the way, is typical of most B2B companies, converting an MQL into an SQL, sales qualified lead. And then how do you convert these 160 sales qualified leads into 40, or on average 3.4 per month. The reason why monthly goals are really important as opposed to annual is that you want to know that you're making progress every month, that you're on target, behind, or in front of what you need to accomplish. That way, you really do have the model nailed down in terms of how you're going to engineer your revenue growth. Now, we're going to talk about how do you build the engine later on to make this happen, but it's important to understand the exercise first. With some companies, it's not about market penetration, it's about upsell, cross-sell. That's really going to be important. All of us are always innovating and creating new opportunities for additional revenue. It may be new services offerings. It may be analytics offerings that you have with your solution. It may be new products and services that you're adding to the mix. So whatever it is, you always think about how you're going to have, again, the penetration with customers. And as we go through some examples later on, I'm going to give you an example of each company that we work with and how they've applied this model. One of the things that you'll notice in terms of the conversion rates is it's typically higher with customers because they already trust you. They wouldn't be back to make an additional investment if they didn't already trust you, if they weren't already your customer. The third area is partner sales. This is probably the most overlooked area that we found working with many, many different B2B companies. And partner sales is, I think, extraordinary. And it's extraordinary because if you can leverage partners, you can reach markets that you can't reach on your own. You can also, in many cases, reach those markets without investing organically into those markets with direct sales teams. If you're primarily focused here in North America, you may be saying, how do I get to EMEA? Or how do I get to Asia Pac? And do that with partners so that I can get the leverage I'm looking for. But there are certain important things to do in terms of making the partner program work. And we're going to discuss those in a complete webinar in 2 weeks about a proactive partner program. Most companies set up an opportunistic program with partners, and it doesn't give them the yield or the results they're looking for. And then finally, let's look at a new market, a new service, or new solutions. And so you can build out this series of funnels that we talked about in each of these different vectors. One important thing I wanted to state, though, when we're talking about customer acquisition that I forgot to mention is that you can build this out by industry. So, for instance, when we work with ICUC, a large social media management services company, their penetration strategy was to go in and penetrate 12 different markets, 12 different industries. On the other hand, As we work with a company, one of our customers, Technical Toolboxes, they have a myriad of engineering performance solutions. So they're thinking about how they look at penetrating those customers with the set of solutions that they have today. So that becomes another important way to look at it. So you can construct these funnels by industry, by solution, by service, or other attributes. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about that. So to get to the $8 million number that we just talked about, you can see the contribution comes through these 4 different areas. It comes through new customer acquisition. It comes through upsell, cross-sell with current customers. It comes through working with effective channel partners that are going to help you sell and distribute and service your solutions and services that you have in different markets. And it also comes to your own personal innovation to bring new products or services to market. Now, to do that means that's the plan for this year. So that's great. Now we understand the plan. The question is, how do we do the next 2 things? Number 1 is, how do you leverage revenue acceleration best practices? And then number 2 is, how do you create this engine? And that's what we want to talk about next. So we created something called the Revenue Acceleration Map. And the reason why we wanted to share this with you is because, first of all, we applied this to ourselves as operating B2B companies and scaling companies at different sizes to ensure that this was really a map that was going to work. And number 2 is most of us are looking for a roadmap. When you look inside marketing, sales, business development, and other areas of your company, you're trying to ascertain, do you have everything in place to make this revenue growth happen? The third thing that was important here is that we wanted to eliminate what we call mindless sales and marketing experimentation. So a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs that I know, when we get together initially, lament about how they've tried lots of different things, much like going to Las Vegas and on vacation and going to the casino. There's a reason why those casinos are just fabulously ornate, fabulous to go to, and large in scale. And that's because most of the money, 90% plus, goes to the house as opposed to your pocket. So if you think about the revenue acceleration map, we want to show you this visual map that we've created. Behind every one of these icons is a lot of best practices. But we wanted to show that in a way that is easy for you to assimilate, easy to understand, and easy for you to share. So if you think about today, here's your 3 funnels on the bottom that we talked about. This is what we call revenue engineering, and creating the right model to actually do that. And by the way, after today's webinar, if you'd like to sit down, and we'll be happy to do this for free, sit down and look at how do you want to grow your business, and how do you want to engineer the results you have, whether by industry, by product or service, by geography, or by some other means. We're happy to do that revenue engineering exercise with you, because it starts there first. One company that we sat down with and did this $35 million company in California, they wanted to grow the revenue by 30% year over year because their investors were expecting that. But what they hadn't really thought about, to that word intentional, is they hadn't really thought about where that growth was going to come from. So we had to do that first, which is really sit down with them and to ascertain where the growth was going to come from so we could actually engineer those results with them. Up here, number 2 is strategic. Do you have the buyer intelligence that you need? Do you have the market intelligence that you need? Do you have the use cases built out that you need? The red 3 and 4 is about marketing best practices and putting that in place for your organization. 5 and 6 is about best practices for sales so that you can go forward and do that in a demonstrable way. And then number 7 is what I call other revenue growth vectors, such as your partner channel, moving into new markets, and doing that in the right way, if you will, and then upsell, cross-sell. Let me just stop for a second and just talk a little bit about new markets. So all of us are focused on certain markets, and we're wondering if adjacent markets or other markets would be valuable for us to get into. The challenge that I see in most cases is that companies get into new markets because they hire somebody that maybe came from that market, has domain experience, and they go forward and get into that new market by making investments. We suggest that there's a better way to do that. And we're going to talk about how do you gain buyer intelligence in your existing and new markets, and do that before you start investing in expensive sales and marketing resources. Okay, so now what we want to talk about is, those are some of the best practices that we talked about, and we've validated those over the past 12 years with many, many B2B clients. How do you build out this revenue acceleration engine that's going to scale, give you predictability, and really allow you to make the right decisions in terms of growth? And we want to talk about some of the key major ingredients that are important. So this first one is what we talked about, buyer intelligence. When was the last time you actually conducted a buyer intelligence survey with either your target audience or with your customers? And so this becomes really important in terms of understanding your target audience, understanding your decision makers. What we realized as we worked with many, many companies, and even when we were at Intech, is we realized that we didn't necessarily really understand what our decision makers wanted, what they needed, what they prioritized. We were unsure about the pains that we solved and how important those were. And we knew that we had lots of value propositions, but we wanted to rank order those value propositions. So the buyer intelligence survey became core to what we did. And it's core to what we do today, because it gives you grounding. It helps enable your team, your management team, to all coalesce about truth about your target audience. It's also very important in terms of proving to third parties, partners, investors, and other stakeholders that you truly know your audience. So we love to think about cracking the code as we talk about that here, which is before you invest in a lot of programs, invest in your buyer, invest in what's important to them to understand them. And that means probably surveying at least 50 to 100 decision makers in your target audience to understand the pains or business challenges that you solve and how important those are, to have them rank or prioritize the value propositions that you offer, to look at how they want to buy, what's important to them, and also if they were looking for your service or your solution today, where would they go? What path would they use to get there? How would they evaluate your solution? Who do they trust? Those are really valuable ways for you to triangulate on the truth that you need to do this. And so that's the first ingredient of cracking the code in putting in your revenue acceleration engine, really is understanding the buyer. So once you do that through your survey, you can create the messages, as we call it, the core messaging document that we create for our clients. And then that becomes offers that are important for the client. The second part or major ingredient in your revenue acceleration engine is implementing what we call one source of truth. What we found is everybody has a CRM system today for sales. The question is, do you have a marketing automation system? So even if you do today, are they optimized? Have you optimized them for your company and for your team and for your execution, or were they just turned on? We find many companies do have these subscriptions, but they haven't optimized that for what we call the prospect to sales superhighway. And so we've created the best practices way to put in these systems, whether it be HubSpot or whether it be Pardot Salesforce or other applications, because you want to make sure that everybody that you have, prospects that you have, contacts, and customers, all reside in this solution that you have today, because it's going to be really important to be able to score and grade. So if you get 5,000 or 10,000 people that come to your website, and let's say they're driven by campaigns that you're providing or word of mouth that they find out about you, you want to be able to prioritize which ones are most important to you. So you get the ability to score and grade everybody that is involved with your company, and then you can prioritize who you're going to spend time with based upon the scoring and grading system that you have. The next thing is creating the right content offers. So if you look at this map here, you'll notice that there are certain offers that are going to help you create awareness, certain that are going to help you convert expressed interest, certain that are going to help the buyer's journey, and certain that are going to help in terms of helping your buyer conduct their evaluation with you. So these offers are really important. So for instance, one of the ones that I love is a buyer's guide. We've created many different versions of buyer's guides for our clients. So if your target audience doesn't understand how to buy your service or solution today, perhaps they'd like to have a buyer's guide that emphasizes the most important things that they should be looking at and evaluating for your service, because they don't know. They're really looking for a roadmap. They also be really looking at how they should evaluate that. Another good one is an ROI blueprint. So if your buyer needs to cost justify the solution that they're looking at investing with you, how do they do that? What's the ROI? So giving them the ability to really understand how to build the ROI or the business case can be very important. Over here, it may be a customer or industry success story. So if I'm ready to buy, a lot of times people abandon the buying process at the very end because the risk is high and they're looking for certainty. They're looking for certainty that this is going to work. They're looking for certainty that they're making the right decision. So having the success story of somebody that's just like them is really important. So this is another important ingredient to you building out your revenue acceleration engine. This next one is choosing the right campaign vehicles. These are just a number of the ones that we help our clients implement. But so for instance, a content syndication program. If you build great content like buyer's guides, ROI guides, industry success stories, best practices, checklist, these are things that need to be syndicated to your target audience in the right places. So what we're really talking about is assembling the right ingredients to build the perfect recipe. And the perfect recipe is what you're looking at, which is getting to your target audience, engaging them, and helping them, guide them through the buyer's journey. Before COVID, Craig and I would conduct a lot of these revenue acceleration workshops throughout North America. And what we found is we would poll all the executives that would come to the workshops. We would always ask the question, what percentage of your target audience are you reaching today? And typically, unless it was very narrowly focused niche, it was about 5%. So one of the things that we've made as the revenue acceleration engine, one of the key hallmarks is having a reach strategy, where every month you're getting to a greater and greater number of your prospects in your target audience, with the goal that eventually you want to reach 100% target penetration. When you put all these ingredients in place and you put this engine in place and implement it, and we use what we call the bot approach. We build, operate, and transfer that knowledge to our clients. Then you start really getting this wonderful scalable engine that gives you the ability to create the leads, convert those leads into opportunities, and convert those opportunities into sales and of course, revenue. So let's talk about each of these different areas we talked about earlier in our webinar. New customer acquisition, and I wanted to just touch on a couple of clients that we work with. One of our clients is a company called AvidXchange. They are a accounts payable e-payment solution provider out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And when we sat down with them, one of the things that they wanted to do was they wanted to double revenue every year going forward. So in their case, they didn't have a marketing organization, so we were the marketing organization for them. And we created over 300 market qualified leads every month for them. We helped them graduate those into sales opportunities. and scale that. We also helped them reconstitute and implement their partner program so they could have significant reach in the different markets moving forward. And so this became really a wonderful opportunity for us to partner with the company, help them build their organization in marketing, support the sales organizations that they have, reconstitute the what they were looking for as far as partners and the partner program, and then really focus on the profitability of the company and the underlying model. In the customer upsell, another customer that we worked with, our client, is ScrewDude. Now, ScrewDude is just a tremendous company, and they currently have 6,000 schools, universities, community colleges that are customers of theirs. So when we began working with them to create their revenue acceleration playbook, the focus there was not focused on penetration, as in the prior example. In this example, it was focused on wallet share. So now the objective was to increase the wallet share from 2 solutions to 10. And so we worked with them to put in the program, and this is really a lot of fun when you do this, because they believe that their customers are champions. And so we would work with their champions to share that knowledge with other champions and propagate that. Let's talk about partner channels, one of the areas we talked about which is most overlooked. So at Intact, as I mentioned, as we scaled the company, half of our revenue growth came from the partner channel. We found that there were many different partners we could work with. Half of them were CPA firms, accounting firms that private labeled our solution to market. Half were market makers that would take our solution into different verticals that we didn't have reach to get into. And we did it in a very proactive way, enabling way, working with partners. And it was just tremendous. And by the way, the one thing that happened with Intact, which is extraordinary, is the company was acquired for $850 million by the Sage Group. And so it was really a phenomenal outcome for the investors and also for all the stakeholders. But in this case, too, another company that we work with is a company called eBuilder out of Florida. And eBuilder provides capital management systems for large projects. And so one of the things that we found as we worked with eBuilder is that they would work with large engineering firms around the world. And they would get these large projects that were very successful. That what they would do with Jacobs Engineering or Bechtel or AECOM. And so what we did with them is we sat down and said, how do we get not 1 per year? How do we get 10 or 20 per year? And so in their case, and we'll talk about that in our next webinar, we actually built the enabling strategy to allow them to get these numbers. So every time we did a partner event, we would get 5 to 10 new projects with these partners. And that really substantially allowed them to grow, significant growth. And in fact, one of the companies, Trimble, actually acquired eBuilder. Finally, we want to talk about new markets, new services, or new solutions. As we mentioned, one of our clients is ICUC, a global social media management services company. And working together with them, they were always looking at launching new social media management services to their clients. And so as we did that, and we looked at how we would actually bring those solutions to market, we came up with something called the social customer journey. And we realized that we needed to take each of these different solutions, and we needed to make sense out of that in terms of how their customers would look at these services. So as they were looking at launching social commerce, or as they were looking at launching social customer care, we actually could look at the complete customer journey that each of their customers had for their clients and be able to provide the right service, the right solution at the right stage. So that whether the issue was being discovered, whether it's converting sales, growing customer influence, each of these phases, we really started working that out. And that's what I find with a lot of companies today. A lot of companies, if you're at a company today, you may have some very innovative services or solutions, but the question is, how do you provide them in a cohesive, strategic way to your clients And that's one of the things that we typically do as we work together with our clients. So let's recap. We talked about building out your revenue acceleration plan through revenue engineering with each of these different segments. We're going to share with you our revenue acceleration map so you can look at these revenue growth best practices that we're talking about. And looking at really deploying your revenue acceleration engine in 2020. Getting the right ingredients lined up so you can do that. And we're here to help you do that. One of the other things you'll find about on-demand advisors is that we love to innovate. We love to innovate something that's new, something that people haven't heard of previously. And so in the past couple of webinars, we talked about how to harness buyer intelligence and market intelligence to really understand truly your markets, to understand your buyer. In our last webinar, we talked about how a sales-driven website can accelerate your sales cycle by 33% or more. In our next webinar, we're going to talk about how a proactive partner program will enable you to generate the type of revenue growth that we had at Intact. So we hope that you'll join us for that. Now let's talk a little bit about what you think is your most important takeaway from today's webinar. And again, we appreciate you participating, sharing, and we try to get through as much wonderful, extraordinary information that we can share with you in 45 minutes or so. So go ahead and talk about what you think your need is and what your takeaway is that you'd like to apply from today's webinar. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for Q&A and answer questions that you may have. Okay, so what do you think you really need when you think about your needs from today and ascertain your greatest need that you have going into this year in 2021? Okay, so I'll close this off and share the results with everybody, and thank you for participating. Okay, 19% of you stated that you need better buyer intelligence. So that's fantastic. We think it really starts there. 69%, that's really the majority of you, stated that you need a revenue growth engine. And we would be most happy to talk to you about where you are today and how do you put this in? How do you put this in place today? 6% stated that you'd like to have your website accelerate your sales process. And another 6% stated you'd like to have better partners to drive revenue growth. So fantastic, and thank you for participating in this. Okay, at this stage, what we'd like to do is open this up for Q&A. So please go ahead, post your questions. I'd like to address a number of questions today, and then what we'll do is make sure that if we run out of time, that we can go ahead and address these questions one-on-one. Okay, Leslie, will slides from our presentation be made available? Yes, I will make these slides available to you, Leslie, so appreciate that. This one is from Lauren. Any consideration in your formula to account for churn? Great question in terms of looking at churn, because churn is a big issue that we found with all these subscription-based services, and everybody has churn. And yes, there is a way to account for that. And so largely what you need to do is look at what your expected churn is and compensate through your net additions. So if you'll find with like Salesforce, for instance, a lot of times when they would talk about what they're projecting in terms of growth quarter to quarter, they're always talking about net adds, which is really subtracting out the churn and looking at the net adds, the difference between those two. But Lauren, I'm happy to talk to you about that further because that's a good question. Will you get a copy of the slide deck and recording? Yes. For everybody that's registered for today's webinar, I will be sharing with you a copy of the webinar so that you can share that with other colleagues that you have today. So I just wanted you to know that. There's a lot of information to digest. I guess that's a good statement that you made, Kishore. Yes, there is a lot of information. I do try to get as much compacted into the webinar as we can, because your time is valuable, And so we want to maximize what you're able to take from this. That's another reason why we record. Here's a question, and this is, let me see who posed a question here. Not sure. Oh, it's from Daniel. What is the range you've encountered in marketing expense as a percent of current revenue? What do you believe is the long-term goal of marketing expense as a percent of revenue? A good question. So most companies, by the way, when you think about percent of marketing spend as a percent of revenue, you'll find that a lot of companies will look in the 5 to 10% range, 5% being kind of a status quo, 10% being growth. What we do is, that's a great rule of thumb, but we look at marketing expense from a little bit different perspective. When we talked about revenue engineering, and we talked about the number of MQLs, SQLs, and clients that you need to acquire, we'd rather tie marketing spend into your revenue growth goals. That way, everything's tied together. The challenge for a lot of people is they do these expenditures in silos, and so consequently, your marketing spend is not tied to revenue. When I talked to a CEO at a company, another company that we work with in California, his first question is, "Hey Bob, we're spending $750 million a year on marketing expenditures, but I don't understand how that's translating into sales outcomes. So could you help us start there first?" And so we did. So that's an excellent question, excellent place to start. Let's look at perhaps a couple more questions. This question is from Ashley. Ashley wanted to know, does this methodology apply to services companies as well? And the answer is yes. When we talk about ICUC, for instance, they're 100% of a services company. So that's what they provide as social media management services. So this model that we talked about, Ashley, does apply just as well to product or solution companies as well as to services companies. Here's a question from Jason. Jason said, how did you get the revenue growth through the channel at Intact? So the way we did that is we really created this proactive partner program that we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. So please join us for that, Jason. And like I talked about, we found that there are a lot of what we call market makers, a lot of market makers. So for instance, there's a company called RealPage in Texas that is a leading solution provider of solutions into the real estate market, in commercial real estate. So they needed a solution that would actually help do all the financial management of what they need to do for their clients. And it made more sense for them to take our solution, private label it, and take it to market as their own, as part of their suite. That's also a really good case in point in terms of building out the solution that the customer needs, because sometimes we all have solutions, but it may not be the whole solution. And here's another one. This question is from Jay. Jay says, where do I start first? So that's a good question, Jay. I think that we actually do work with our clients to actually help them execute this plan, put together the right playbook that they need, and we're happy to do that for you as well. It starts with modeling the revenue engineering that we talked about first. Secondly, it's assessing what do you have in place today, what do you need to put in place to make this work, and then what's the prioritized plan to scale and make that work. And that's what we do when we sit down and we help construct the revenue acceleration playbook for clients. And this is a great time of year that we do that in the fourth quarter and first quarter, is really sit down and figure out in a very pragmatic way, how do you get the type of growth you're looking for? So great questions, and thank you very much. So some next steps that you can take from today's webinar. One is to create your revenue acceleration playbook for 2021. We'd be happy to do that. Some are looking at how do you build this engine that we talked about. Some are looking at, hey, how do we just achieve our numbers for 2021? And some of you may be saying, there's 2 or 3 areas that we really struggle with, so can we focus on those first? So those are all great ways to do that. Another thing I'd like everybody to consider, if you're not already doing that today, is how your website is going to drive your sales process. and drive the buyer's journey. So if you didn't join us 2 weeks ago, let me know, send me an email, and we'll go ahead and send you the recording from that webinar, because I think it'd be very important for you to apply that transformational journey for your current website. So next steps on this transformational journey that we're doing together, in a couple of weeks, on February 2nd, we're going to talk about how a proactive partner program can help you drive your revenue growth. 2 weeks from there, we're going to talk about accelerating your sales performance. Some of you stated that your biggest issue is really getting the type of performance out of your sales team that you have. So we're going to talk about some very specific ways that you can do that. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to talk about how you deliver compelling ROI and cost justification. It's interesting. We work with a lot of companies that work with their clients to implement their services, their solutions successfully, but they haven't measured what's the impact, the ROI, the return on investment, if you will. And so we want to talk about how you can do that, how you can engineer to those results, because that provides a foundational business case that you're going to need to build up and expand your success. We work with a lot of clients of different sizes. Some are startup companies, early stage companies. Some are serial investors that are looking at a best practices way to do this. Some are mid-stage companies that are looking at scaling and growing. And some are large public companies like SAP, for instance, where they're saying, hey, we have a very specific area we'd like you to come and help us focus on as far as best practices. So here's my contact information. Here's Craig's. You're welcome to visit our website, ondemandadvisors.com, to learn more information about upcoming webinars. And if you'd like to engage with us, or if you have questions, please feel free to send any questions that you have. We'd be more than happy to and delighted to help you on your journey, your transformational journey for 2021 to achieve your revenue growth success. So on behalf of myself, Craig, and our entire On-Demand Advisors team, we'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We look forward to a promising and rewarding 2021 with you, and know this will be a transformational year for revenue growth for yourself and for your company. Thank you, everyone.